Okay, well, this is Dr. Jacob Lauritzen, and you are watching Read, Write, and Cite. This is the channel where I teach you how to read, write, and cite for your college classes. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the structure for how to actually use a source for a quote or for a paraphrase. So we're going to go through some of those important concepts for attribution, for how to actually quote or paraphrase and cite a source. You put it all together, this video is going to kind of give you a good structure for how to do that, especially if you're not really comfortable using academic language. This is going to help you through that. Okay, so first thing we got to talk about is what a direct quote is. A direct quote it's the exact words used by your source. So if you're quoting a book, when you use their words, that is a direct quote. And that quote should always begin and end with quotation marks. So let's, here's an example. All right, I pulled this from an actual test, a sample test from the Arizona Department of Education website. So here we go. Elizabeth Rosenthal, a journalist for the New York Times, in her essay, "In German Suburb, Life Goes On Without Cars," writes, "Street parking, driveways, and home garages are generally forbidden in this experimental new district on the outskirts of Freiburg." Rosenthal 1. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening. We start with the phrase Elizabeth Rosenthal. That is identifying who the author of the source is. This is really good structure for the first time you're using a source. When you're first introducing them, saying the author's full name, great idea. Then if you have the information in a separate clause, so I've got a comma before and after this next group of words, give a description for who they are or what's important about the source that you're about to cite. This creates a context for your reader. It also helps to establish a reason for them to trust what you're about to say in the context of what you've already been saying. Once we've identified what kind of source it is, we want to put the title. Now, if the title is part of a larger work, like it's part of a newspaper, it's like an article on a web page or a site or something, then it's going to be in quotation marks. That's just following MLA style. It's separated with commas on either side because this is technically a dependent clause. Then we get to the verb writes. Now, this is really important because this is what actually sets up the predicate for our sentence. The real sentence here is Elizabeth Rosenthal writes, and then the quote of what she writes. That's the structure. Everything else is just extra information. So it's really important that you put your punctuation in the correct spots so that your real sentence is still there and you don't kind of get bogged down with all the extra words. Once you've got your verb that sets up your quote that you're going to use, you got a comma, you got your quotation, and then you have to end your quotation and then follow that with a citation. Now, many students get confused between the difference between a quotation and a citation. Quotation is when you're using someone's exact words. A citation is when you're giving credit for an author's information. You need to give a citation anytime you use someone else's words or their ideas. So even for a paraphrase or a summary, you should include a citation. In this case, in parentheses, we say the author's last name and a hypothetical page number that this would have come from. The period, you notice, goes on the outside of the parentheses at the end of the sentence. It doesn't go before it. Many students get really confused on this. You need to make sure you don't. Okay, so if we take away all the words and we just look at the structure, this is what we get. Author's full name, comma. Description of the author, if you have it. In his or her essay, you don't put his or her, you put whichever is appropriate pronoun for that person, a comma, then you put the title. If it's part of a larger work, quotation marks. If it is the whole work, like a book, in italics, writes, comma, then you put what they write and you put the quote in there. You end the quotation. You begin and end your quotation with quotation marks, and then your citation, parentheses, whatever the appropriate citation information is for that source, and you end with a period. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a second, pause the video, and try doing this with something on your own. You can make up all the information. I just want you to get a feel for how to put these words together, and then look at what it looks like on your paper when you do this. Okay? Okay, so assuming that you stopped and you did this, hopefully you kind of got a feel for what it is to write a paragraph using the structure. Now, the first time that you introduce a source, you want to give all that extra background information. As you continue to use the source, it isn't necessary. You just need to say the author's last name, set up the appropriate verb to lead into your quotation. In this case, I use the word continues. I separate it with a comma because it's a different clause, and then you give the quotation and you follow it with a citation. Now, one thing I want to point out, in English classes in MLA, we use present tense verbs when talking about a quote or something that's been written. Even if we're talking about Shakespeare and he died 400 plus years ago, we don't say Shakespeare wrote. We say Shakespeare writes when we lead into an actual quote. When we talk about him as the person and we talk about something he's done in the past, we can say things in past tense. But when you talk about the actual words, then we say Shakespeare writes. That's an MLA thing. I'm not sure why they made that decision. Other citation styles don't necessarily follow that. APA doesn't do that. But if you're using MLA, you're in an English class, you need to use a present tense verb. In this case, I use the one continues. All right, so we're going to do the same thing again. The structure is incredibly simple. It's just the author's last name, an appropriate verb like writes, comma, the actual quotation, and you follow it with the citation. So I want you to do the same thing. Practice this, stop, pause the video, practice writing your own follow-up quotation to what you did in your first, and just take a minute to do that. Okay, it's simple, right? It's not incredibly difficult. It's going to end up looking something like this, but I want you to see that this is something that's capable from your computer, from your hand, right? This isn't just big words that someone online is using. These can be your own words when you use this structure. Okay, so let's talk about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing and summarizing, they're almost the exact same thing. In both cases, you're going to take the ideas from someone else, but put them into your words, right? Now, for a paraphrase, they say it's about the same length. I don't think that's the important thing to distinguish. A summary takes something bigger and condenses it to something shorter. That's technically the difference. But in the end, it's going to look the same on paper, except you won't have quotation marks because you're using your words, not someone else's, and they don't need to be in quotation marks. So again, we're going to look at the same thing, except it's a paraphrase now. Elizabeth Rosenthal, who's our author, a journalist for the New York Times. Actually, she might be like New York Magazine. Anyway, in her essay in German Suburb, A Life Goes On Without Cars, writes, and here, instead of going into a quote, we are going into a paraphrase. Writes about an experiment to limit car usage in a suburb outside of Freiburg, Germany. So all the things around it are the same, except in the middle, we don't have a quote, we have a paraphrase. Okay? It's going to look really similar on paper. The choice whether you do a quote or a citation is up to you, obviously. In English classes, we do emphasize someone's specific words, but in other citation styles, we don't. We really focus on the content of the ideas instead of the words of the idea. So like in APA, you're like never using direct quotes. You're always paraphrasing or summarizing. So both of these skills are incredibly important. Okay, so same thing. Let's go ahead and pause. I want you to try this on your own just to get a feel for what it looks like. And when you're ready, go ahead and move on. Okay? All right, so here's an example of our previous quote as a paraphrase. Rosenthal continues to explain that the majority of families in Vauban do not own cars. So you've got the author's name, the verbs that sets up the paraphrase, and then the citation. Because it's not a direct quote, there's no quotation marks. And this just looks like a normal sentence because it is. And so same thing, I want you to go ahead and pause, practice, use this structure, and kind of get a feel for what it's like using this structure for your own words. Okay, and that's it. So let's review real fast. Using this structure for direct quotes and paraphrases It's going to help you to organize and present source material in a text. It's going to help you to provide appropriate attribution, to quote or summarize a source, to follow that up with a citation. Now, if you put this in a larger scheme of a whole paper, what you would do after following these steps is you would then follow up by explaining the significance of this information you just presented in the context of your paper. So you would explain how this supports your thesis, your main point, your argument, whatever the case is. You then take this structure and you follow it up with your own words. And the next time that you go to add another source or another paraphrase or quote, you just follow these steps again. You provide attribution, you give the information, and you follow it with an explanation. That's it. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this video. I hope this is helpful. If you have a question or if you have a comment, please, you can follow me on social media at Carpe and Zen, or me directly at Dr. Jacob Lauritzen, or it's at Dr. Lauritzen through social media, or you can subscribe and ask a question in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.